Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. Aliens bragged about their long lifespan until they met a human. Commander Vex'Tor adjusted his ceremonial collar for the fifth time. The gleaming silicone fabric caught the light from the three suns visible through the vast transparent dome of the Grand Nexus Convention Center. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Pax. "Why am I even here? We all know the Quarrens will win again." Pax, with his characteristic teal skin flushing a deeper blue in excitement, straightened his own uniform. "Sir, this is the most prestigious gathering in the known universe, the 493rd Grand Longevity Conference. We may not win, but just being invited means the Galactic Council recognizes our species as one of the longest-lived sentient races. That's something, right?" I rolled my 6 eyes simultaneously, a gesture my people, the Zinthar, perfected over our considerable lifespans. At 842 standard galactic cycles, I was barely middle-aged. My grandfather had just celebrated his 2400 cycle and was considered merely getting on in years. "Besides," Pax continued, "rumor has it there's a new species being introduced this year. Apparently they're from some backwater system and only recently achieved faster-than-light travel." "Wonderful," I scoffed. "More fresh meat for Ambassador Quotali to lord over. You know how those Quarrens get." I mimicked the high-pitched sing-song voice of the Korean ambassador. "Oh my, only 900 cycles. How absolutely quaint. I remember when I was that young. About 4,000 cycles ago." Pax laughed, a rippling sound like water trickling over smooth stones. "Come on, Commander, the opening ceremony is about to begin." We glided toward the enormous central auditorium, where representatives from 27 species had gathered. The Grand Longevity Conference, held once every 50 cycles, was ostensibly about sharing medical advancements and life extension technologies, but everyone knew what it really was: a cosmic pissing contest about who lived longest. The hierarchy was as clear as the crystal waters of my home world. At the very top stood the Quarians with their ridiculous 5,000 cycle average lifespan. Their delegates sat in the most elevated section of the auditorium, literally looking down on everyone else. Their skin, pale and translucent, caught the light and seemed to glow from within. Evolution's way of boasting. Below them were the Trell, a silicon-based species who typically lived around 3,000 cycles. They were followed by my own people, the Zinthar, comfortably in the third-tier position with our respectable 2,500 cycle lifespan. The middle ranks included species ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 cycles. The bottom tier, those who barely squeaked into the conference, were the Shorties, species who only managed a measly 800 to 1,000 cycles before returning to the cosmic dust. "Look at the CRS," I whispered to Pax as we took our seats. "They're practically on the floor. Can you imagine? Only 800 cycles. By the time they're finally figuring out what to do with their lives, they're already facing mortality." Pax nodded sympathetically. "Practically mayflies. Must be terrifying." The ceremonial gong, a massive instrument carved from a single crystal of Quarren design, sounded through the chamber. The vibrations resonated at a frequency precisely calibrated to be pleasing to all attending species. The Grand Speaker, a Quarren elder named Talrith, who claimed to be nearly 6,000 cycles old, floated to the central podium. "Esteemed delegates," his voice carried effortlessly across the vast space, "welcome to the 493rd Grand Longevity Conference. We gather to celebrate the most precious gift in the universe, time. The more of it one has, the more one can accomplish, learn, and contribute to the cosmic tapestry." I settled back in my seat, preparing for the usual self-congratulatory speeches, the smug posturing, the subtle and not-so-subtle reminders of who stood where in the great chain of longevity. Then Tolrith said something unexpected. "This year, we welcome a new species to our ranks, a species that has only recently joined the galactic community, but whose application to our conference has intrigued the committee. Please welcome the first representative from the planet Earth." A murmur rippled through the auditorium. A new species. This was unusual. Typically, a species had to be observed for at least 5 generations before being invited. My curiosity was genuinely piqued. "What's an Earth?" Pax leaned over to ask. Before I could shrug my ignorance, a single figure emerged from the entrance at the base of the auditorium floor, the lowest position possible, even lower than the CRS. "Oh," I said with renewed disinterest, "they must be really short-lived." The shocking arrival, the creature that walked, Yes, walked on two legs like some kind of primitive, to the center of the floor, looked utterly unremarkable. Bictal, mostly hairless except for a thick patch on top of its head, skin that wasn't luminescent, metallic, or even an interesting color, just a dull beige pink. Two eyes. Two? How did it even perceive depth properly? That's the new species, I whispered to Pax. Looks like someone the Ventari would keep as a pet. Several delegates around us suppressed their equivalent of laughter. The Ventari were notorious for collecting exotic, short-lived creatures from across the galaxy. The human stood in the center of the floor, looking remarkably calm for a being surrounded by creatures who collectively had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. It wore some kind of fabric covering in dark blue with shiny metallic pins on the shoulders, not ceremonial robes or even a proper exoskeleton display, just clothes. Grand Speaker Tolrith's voice cut through the murmurs. May I present Captain Regina Blackwell of Earth, representing the species known as humans. Captain Blackwell bowed slightly. Thank you for the invitation. Earth is honored to join this distinguished gathering. Her voice was steady, melodious even. Something about it made me lean forward in my seat. Ambassador Quotali, predictably, couldn't resist making the first jab. He rose from his elevated perch, his translucent skin pulsing with condescending light patterns. Welcome, tiny Earthling. We are curious about your presence here. The Longevity Conference typically only admits species with lifespans exceeding 800 galactic cycles. Surely there's been some mistake. A ripple of titters spread through the audience. I noticed several species from the middle tiers looking particularly pleased. Nothing like someone positioned lower than you to boost your own status. Captain Blackwell's face remained impassive. When she spoke, her voice carried throughout the chamber without technological assistance, an impressive feat. No mistake, Ambassador. While humans typically live less than one galactic cycle, we believe we have much to contribute to the discussion of longevity. The auditorium erupted in unconstrained laughter. Even I couldn't help but join in. Less than one cycle. This was beyond absurd. Why, that was barely enough time to complete basic education, let alone contribute anything meaningful to the universe. Silence, Tollerth commanded, and the room gradually quieted. Captain Blackwell's species has been admitted by unanimous vote of the Council. Their application contained information of interest. That caught my attention. The Council never agreed unanimously on anything. Less than one cycle, Ambassador Quotali repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. What is it exactly? 20 cycles? 30? Do tell us, Captain. How long do you live before your brief flame extinguishes? The human's lips curved upward slightly, not a grimace of embarrassment, but something else, something that, in retrospect, should have warned us all. The average human lifespan is currently 0.08 galactic cycles, she stated calmly. Mathematical conversions flickered across the room as delegates processed this information. 80 orbital periods? Someone shouted incredulously. That's nothing. The CRS, previously the shortest-lived species present, looked positively giddy. Finally, someone beneath them in the hierarchy, Captain Blackwell, stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, that strange curve still on her lips. She looked amused. No, confident, as if she knew something that none of us, with our thousands of cycles of collective wisdom, had figured out yet. And that, more than anything, made me uneasy. The day following the opening ceremony, the schedule changed. Typically, the first 3 days involved species presenting their latest advancements in cellular regeneration, temporal displacement therapy, and consciousness transfer technologies. Boring stuff, but essential to maintaining our impressive lifespans. Instead, Grand Speaker Tollerth announced a special exhibition. Esteemed delegates, his voice echoed through the Grand Hall, the Galactic Council has decided that, given our unusual new participant, we should begin with demonstrations of how our respective longevities benefit our civilizations. Each delegation will have 15 minutes to present the advantages their lifespan grants them. A murmur of approval swept through the audience. Perfect, a chance to put this human in her place. The presentations will proceed in ascending order of average lifespan. Tollerth continued, his pale eyes briefly flickering toward Captain Blackwell, which means our Earth delegate will begin. The human nodded, apparently unsurprised. I request to present last, if possible. I would prefer to learn from the esteemed delegates first. Tollerth seemed taken aback. After a moment's hesitation, he inclined his head. Very well, the CRS will begin. What followed was a parade of self-aggrandizement that, even for me, felt excessive. The CRS boasted about their ability to master 15 different art forms in a single lifetime. The Voral highlighted their society's tradition of individuals writing comprehensive 100-volume histories of their civilizations. The Trail demonstrated how their 3,000-cycle lifespans allowed them to personally oversee terraforming projects from barren rocks to thriving ecosystems. Consider this, Ambassador Threx of the Trail said smugly. I personally planted the first seedling on Trail Colony 9. I nurtured its growth. I watched its ecosystem develop. I guided its evolution over 2,000 cycles. Today, it hosts 16 million sentient beings. What could a species that lives only 80 orbital periods possibly accomplish? Throughout it all, Captain Blackwell sat perfectly still in her assigned seat on the auditorium floor. She didn't fidget, unusual for such a short-lived species. Instead, she watched each presentation with intense focus, occasionally making notes on a small electronic device. When my turn came, I boasted about how the Zinthar had perfected the art of patience. Our scientists spend 300 cycles testing a single hypothesis. Our architects design structures meant to last 10,000 cycles. Our philosophers contemplate questions for 600 cycles before even attempting an answer. I couldn't resist looking directly at Captain Blackwell as I delivered my closing line. True wisdom requires time. There are simply no shortcuts. She met my gaze with those two inadequate eyes and nodded, as if agreeing. The gesture confused me enough that I nearly stumbled over my concluding remarks. When Ambassador Quotali took the stage for the Quarians, he barely referenced his prepared remarks. Instead, he looked directly at the human and spoke with exaggerated slowness, as if addressing a particularly dim child. I have personally witnessed the birth and death of 32 civilizations less advanced than my own. I have forgotten more knowledge than your entire species has ever recorded. I have watched stars ignite and extinguish. When I was your age, Captain, I hadn't even learned to speak properly. Laughter rippled through the audience. Captain Blackwell's expression remained neutral, but I could have sworn I saw something flicker in those two eyes, not anger or embarrassment, something else, something that looked almost like pity. As the presentations concluded, Whole Earth addressed her. Captain Blackwell, you may now take the floor. She rose smoothly and walked to the center platform, that unsettling confidence still evident in her posture. The room fell silent, more out of curiosity than respect. What could a Mayfly possibly teach gods? The human's turn. Captain Regina Blackwell stood at the center of the auditorium, somehow managing to look both small and commanding simultaneously. She wore no ceremonial adornments, no display of accomplishments, just that simple blue uniform with metallic pins. Yet something in her posture demanded attention. Esteemed delegates, she began, her voice clear and steady. Thank you for sharing your remarkable achievements. I've learned much today about what's possible with millennia of personal experience. She paused, surveying the room. Humans have always known we're short-lived compared to other sentient species. Our scientists predicted this even before we made first contact. But what they couldn't predict was how condescending you'd all be about it. A wave of uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the audience. I shifted in my seat. This wasn't the groveling we'd expected. Let me tell you what it means to be human, she continued. It means knowing from childhood that your time is finite, extremely finite. It means feeling the clock ticking in your bones with every heartbeat. Every single day, we make choices knowing we'll never have enough time for everything. She tapped her device, and a holographic display appeared above her. It showed a timeline with colored segments. The average human sleeps for 26 years of their life. We work for about 13 years continuously. We spend roughly 4 years eating, 5 years on our electronic devices, and 3 years in education. The remaining time is split between transportation, hygiene, raising children, recreation, and, if we're lucky, pursuing our passions. Ambassador Quotali laughed dismissively. You've just proved our point. You barely have time to do anything at all. Pathetics. Captain Blackwell's expression remained unchanged. Perhaps. Or perhaps we've evolved to make every moment count. Computer, display comparison chart A. The hologram shifted to show 2 parallel timelines, one labeled Human Developmental Milestones and another labeled Average Galactic Sentient Development. By age 3, human children master language, proportionally equivalent to your species at age 30 cycles. By 18, we're considered adults, equivalent to your 200 cycles. Our scientists make groundbreaking discoveries in their 30s and 40s, your 400 to 500 cycles. She tapped her device again. Computer, display Earth technological timeline. A new display appeared, showing a rapidly accelerating curve. 10,000 years ago, a mere blip to your species, humans were using stone tools. 5,000 years ago, we built the pyramids. 500 years ago, we were still using horse-drawn transportation. 200 years ago, we had no electricity. 100 years ago, no computers. 50 years ago, no interplanetary travel. 20 years ago, no quantum communications. Captain Blackwell's voice grew more intense. We went from our first powered flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. Some of you take longer than that to decide on a new hairstyle. For the first time, the conference hall was completely silent. Our brains evolved to process information faster, she continued. Our neural connections fire more rapidly. We experience time differently than you do. What feels like a leisurely decade to you feels like a desperate race against oblivion to us. She displayed another chart. This shows scientific papers published per capita per year across known species. Humans produce 47 times more scientific output per individual than the galactic average. We don't have time to test a hypothesis for 300 cycles, Commander Vex'Tor. We need answers now because we won't be around later. I felt my skin flush with embarrassment at being directly addressed. We built a global civilization in under 10,000 years, something that took most of your species hundreds of thousands. We cured diseases in decades that plagued us for centuries. We mapped our entire genome in less than 100 years after discovering DNA existed. She paused, letting her words sink in. But perhaps most importantly, our brief lives give us something none of you have: urgency. While you contemplate, we act. While you observe, we change. While you preserve, we innovate. Ambassador Quotai's luminescence had dimmed noticeably. That's all very impressive for our primitive species, but you'll burn out. You'll destroy yourselves before you achieve true greatness. Captain Blackwell smiled, a genuine expression this time, not the tight-lipped thing from before. That brings me to my final point. Computer, display human achievement density index. The hologram changed to show a complex formula with species listed in descending order. Humans were at the top, followed by other short-lived species I'd never even heard of. The Quarrens, surprisingly, ranked near the bottom. This index measures accomplishments relative to lifespan. By this measure, the shorter-lived a species is, the more they tend to accomplish per unit of time. The correlation is nearly perfect across all known sentient beings. She gestured to Ambassador Quotali. You've lived 5,000 cycles, Ambassador. In that time, how many truly new ideas have you personally generated? How many paradigm-shifting discoveries? How many risks have you taken? The Quarren didn't respond. We humans live short, bright lives, Captain Blackwell said, her voice softening. We burn like supernovas compared to your steady stars. And like supernovas, the brilliance of our brief existence seeds the universe with elements necessary for new life, new civilizations, new possibilities. She looked around the room, meeting as many eyes or eye equivalents as she could. We don't have time to waste, and that, esteemed delegates, is our greatest strength. The revelation. The conference adjourned for a recess following Captain Blackwell's presentation. The usual mingling and networking that occurred during these breaks was replaced by clusters of delegates huddled together, voices low, occasionally casting glances toward the human who stood alone near the refreshment area. I found myself drawn to her. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was the lingering sting of how she directly referenced my boast about patience. Whatever the reason, I approached her as she examined a selection of nutrient solutions clearly not designed for her physiology. None of these will suit your biochemistry, I said, coming to stand beside her. I can have the synthesizers create something compatible if you wish. She turned those two eyes toward me, and I was struck by how much expression they conveyed despite their limited number. Commander Vex'Tor, right? That's very kind of you. Water will be fine for now. I signaled to a service drone, which promptly delivered a container of purified H2O. Your presentation was provocative, I said, watching as she sipped the clear liquid. But I can't help feeling you're overcompensating. Surely you must envy our extended lifespans. Captain Blackwell considered this for a moment. Envy? Sometimes, perhaps. Who wouldn't want more time? But I wonder if you truly understand what having nearly unlimited time does to one's perspective. Enlighten me, I said, my tone more dismissive than I'd intended. She didn't seem offended. I noticed during your presentation that you spoke of 300-cycle research projects with pride, but tell me honestly, Commander, how efficient are those projects? How much actual work occurs each day? I bristled slightly. We are methodical, thorough. We don't rush to conclusions based on inadequate evidence. Of course, she nodded. But isn't it also true that your scientists might spend decades contemplating a single aspect of their research? That meetings to discuss minor procedural changes might stretch over months. That decisions requiring immediate attention in human terms might be postponed for years while committees deliberate. My silence was apparently answer enough. We have a saying on Earth, she continued. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion.